that Warren Gatland had with Trudy Gatland as they went to bed. Even Trudy wouldn't have been able to pick that eventual 37. Yes, we got it straight off the bat, didn't we?
But once you heard Bundy Aki's name being read out, you sensed that, well, he was going for big.
Yeah, and I'd love to know what Bundy thought there was a chance of him going. Like that's how much of a bolter that one was. For me, the take on that is they tried to wait to see if Manu was fit, Manu Vunipola, and the fact was they couldn't quite rely on the fact that he's coming back in a week or 2 weeks, and with his injury-prone record, but his ability to get back, they just couldn't quite back that, and they had to try and find as much of a like-for-like player in Bundy Aki. So I think Manu's loss means Aki's input, and I think everyone was surprised, and I'm sure lots of people cheered in Connacht and in Ireland indeed, but I'm sure there was lots of people around the UK scratching their heads too.
Well, let's look at the Irish side of things first then, because all eyes coming into this were on Johnny Sexton and whether he'd be included. He hasn't been named in the squad. Warren Gatland has been doing media duties all day. Our own Neil Tracy was sitting in on the press conference, and he asked Gatland about why he felt he had to leave Sexton out of the squad.
Look, there's no doubt that was one of the toughest decisions that we had to make. And I've got a huge amount of respect for Johnny and his quality, but it's such a pivotal position for us, and it's about sending a message to the 10s that we have selected, that we have the confidence and belief in them to do a job. And when we looked at it, where we were going in South Africa, and probably the thing that kept coming back to us was Johnny's durability and being able to put a string of matches together consecutively and big matches together. He's been rested on a number of occasions, and that, unfortunately, that's possibly what swayed it for us in terms of that. It's not having the confidence that he can get through what's going to be a tough physical tour.
When you look at Sexton's injury record since the autumn, and a hamstring injury during the Autumn Nations Cup, a hamstring injury at the start of the Champions Cup, and then a couple of head injuries through the Six Nations, and then the one that ruled him out of the match against La Rochelle at the weekend, can you find any issue with anything Warren Gatland had to say there?
No, I think if he's trying to find a reason to leave him out, I think that is probably the obvious one. He is a 35-year-old. He's got lots of miles on the clock. But yes, there has been question marks over the last few years about his ability to finish games. Johnny Sexton's his own worst enemy a lot of the time, because he enjoys defending as much as he enjoys attacking, and that's a rarity in a lot of 10s. He really kind of prides himself on how hard he hits. He hits high, and I suppose you might argue the fact that it would encourage more head-on-head collisions. But he's one of the best defending 10s I've ever come across, certainly I've ever played with, and. Comparatively, if you look at someone like Finn Russell, he'll make his tackles, but he's not going to try and hold someone up, or he's not going to try and smash them. And that's the reality of it. And unfortunately, Johnny Sexton has picked up, besides the soft tissue injury, be it hamstring issues or, groin issues because of kicking, because of the repetition of that, but also, the contact issues. And some are very unlucky, and some maybe are as a result of that high tackle technique. But it has come back to bite him in the end, and you can't, if you're finding, like I said, if you're finding a reason for him not to be selected, that is the obvious one.
But when you think back to that game against England in the Six Nations and how brilliant he was that day, he must feel very disappointed this evening. Particularly, he's always had an issue with people questioning his durability, because they have been there for the last 2, 3, 4 years, and whenever it's brought up in press conferences, he always fights back against it, that he feels if you look deeper into the statistics, actually it's not as bad for the last 2, 3, 4 years. And whenever it's brought up in press conferences, he always fights back against it, that he feels if you look deeper into the statistics, actually it's not as bad as everybody says. So in that situation, are you ringing Warren Gatland afterwards and making your point, or do you just sit tight and listen? As we know, the last time the Lions went to South Africa, 10 players ended up coming home early. There may still be a chance.
Yeah, there's a lot of rugby still to be played. So no, you don't go and you don't dirty your bid by making any kind of reactionary phone calls. He will be very disappointed, and you're right. He does feel as though the media coverage of his issues have far outweighed the actual incidents themselves. I think the other point that's worth thinking about, and it's a really important aspect in any team selection meeting, who's fighting your corner, and you've got the Scottish head coach and Gregor Townsend in one corner, and when you're talking 50-50 decisions, of course they're going to be arguing the points for Finn Russell. He's going to be arguing Finn Russell's ability to bring the ball to the line and all his positive attributes. Then you wait and look across, and no one's saying that about Johnny Sexton. Robin McBride is unlikely to be getting into the minutiae of Johnny Sexton's game. So in any selection meeting, you need someone on your side in there to pitch for you and fight for you. And on this occasion, unfortunately, Johnny Sexton came out second best because of what Gatland mentioned, but also because you could be sure that Gregor Townsend really pushed his own man.
The other big surprise was James Ryan's exclusion. Like a year, 15 months ago, James Ryan was been talked of as a potential Lions captain, as a certain starter alongside Maro Itoje in the second row. He's had his injury problems as well. It seems from listening to Gatland, he also put a lot of stock in what happened Leinster against La Rochelle at the weekend.
And if you look back, what you're going to come up against in South Africa is some of the biggest specimens in world rugby. You think about the four locks that played in the World Cup final, the likes of R.G. Snyman, Etzebeth, whether R.G. Snyman's fit or not, Lou de Jager. These guys are absolutely colossal men. They're 125 kilos, 130 kilos, some of them, 6'8", 6'10", and Gatland has always had a big thing about size. I know he used to talk an awful lot to the Welsh team when Alan Wynne-Jones would be playing with Jake Ball against Paul O'Connell and one other. He'd talk about Alan Wynne-Jones 120 kilos, Jake Ball 118, 119 kilos, Paul O'Connell 109 kilos. So this was something that he constantly reinforced into his team. And if you look across the second rows, other than Tyg Byrne, who's obviously a utility player, they're all big lumps. Johnny Hill is James Ryan a better player than Johnny Hill? In my book, he absolutely is. Is he a bigger player than Johnny Hill? No, he's not. Johnny Hill's got a bigger frame. He's thicker. Probably is, I'm saying he's more aggressive, but he packs more punch. And even though James Ryan gets through a huge amount of work, he is relatively light when you come to second row at international level. And the fact that Will Skelton had such a dominant performance against him in his last audition, it really didn't go for him. And he needed a game where Skelton had such a dominant performance against him in his last audition. It really didn't go for him. And he needed a game where he was man of the match rather than waiting for one of the his opposing second rows to be, and to get physically dominated, just was the final nail in the coffin by the sounds of things.
So as much as we've been looking at the Six Nations and the Champions Cup and looking for players to show form, and that is important for Warren Gatland, I'm sure, in selection, also to the forefront of his mind is the World Cup final and what South Africa did to the English pack, and probably also his own time as forwards coach with the Lions in 2009 and just how physical it was then.
You can be sure he's been on this for a couple of years, and he would have looked. Obviously, the fact that that Wales played South Africa in the World Cup semi-final, and since then, he would have had a real focus towards looking at the Lions and how do you go about beating South Africa? It's crazy to think that South Africa haven't played a Test match, I don't think, since that World Cup final. So. If ever it does feel like there's an opportunity to get them, it's in this series. But they're certainly not going to change the way they played the game through the success they had. They're going to, be this crazy attritional team that they always have been, because of the specimens that they managed to, churn out year on year. So if there isn't an Etzebeth, there's another guy coming through the ranks at 18, 19, 20 years of age who's going to be just as big, just as skillful. And they've got this assembly line of of enormous men that continue pushing the standard and pushing the size of their pack. So I would imagine it's something that's definitely been in the back of his mind, that you've got to at least get parity. It's very difficult to win any test match if you're on the back foot, if you're losing collisions. So it's about getting balance, being able to make sure you are collision winners, but also having the creativity to be able to not try and get into an arm wrestle against them, because most teams that take them on in a pissing contest, end up losing because they just get annihilated by them. Whereas you've got to be able to match them physically, but then think outside the box a little bit and create some opportunities for your faster and wider men. So I think that's just where they're a little bit lacking.
Let's